And welcome everyone to this webinar on Netlify Connect and on how to modernize your web architecture, where we will be talking about what modern web architectures looks like, how you get there, and what the benefits from them are. If you can get me the next slide. We'll start with some quick introductions, and then a presentation from Joe Cicman from Forrester. And then we'll have a panel discussion and some live questions from the audience. Next slide, please. So starting with the introductions, I'm Matt Biilmann. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Netlify. Netlify, as you hopefully all know, is a web platform that helps companies modernize their web architecture and allow them to ship faster with better results and eventually with better return of investment in terms of revenue generation and conversion rates. I have with me today Chris Bach.
Hey everyone, Chris Bach, the other co-founder of Netlify, currently CSO, and also sits on a number of advisory boards and executive boards in the industry, including the Mac Alliance, sort of our industry board for this. And we've been very dependent on Netlify on pushing out an ecosystem and making sure that would sort of proliferate the landscape. And so we're also very avid angel investors in the space. And yes, been breathing composable architecture now, I think it's fair to say, for the last 10 years. Before that, I spent 15 years in agencies, and I'm super happy to be here today talking about what is so close to heart.
And last up, we have our special guest today, Joe Cicman, senior analyst from Forrester.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'm Joe Cicman. I cover B2B e-commerce, marketplaces, and digital experience platforms. And I am thrilled today to put this technology into perspective for you.
So, Joe, I'll take it over to you and let you start with your part and talk through the path to modern web architectures.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you. So next slide. I haven't slipped on ice in 35 years, and that is a knock-on effect of riding BMX. It tends to get me out of trouble in regular life. My sports psychologist tells me that they call this resilience. Now, I build my own bikes. I select every part, and sometimes I modify those parts to fit my style, but I also practice a lot. And I work with coaches and partners. In fact, my contest coach is a 3-time X Games champion. And what all this adds up to is there's no amount of money that anyone can spend on their gear to outride me. And I'm telling you this because it turns out that this also applies to digital experiences. So let's go to the next. See, having digital skills is important because the new connected consumer poses a challenge for brands, and digital business pros like you need to understand how your customers connect across 3 dimensions: devices, platforms, and channels. And then you have to map your portfolio of experiences so that you're present where your customers are. Let's go to the next. I'm going to take you through the model for thinking through your portfolio of experiences is something that we here at Forrester call the 3D connected consumer. Now, 3 dimensions, devices, platforms, and channels now define how consumers are connected to the internet. And brands need to serve their consumers wherever they are in these complex ecosystems. So you need to take a fresh look at how your customers connect as you craft your technology and platform portfolios. And that's because customers use combinations of devices, platforms, and channels that many firms don't support. So you need to understand your customers' digital ecosystems in order to map your portfolio of experiences to how your particular customers connect. Next slide. And that's not a trivial endeavor because customer journeys are not simple and brands are not in control of how the customer goes through that journey. Your digital experience platform is the technology stack upon which you build experiences to support buyer journeys that are nonlinear and in the buyer's control. And the talent that you employ to build these journeys, your practitioners, They need no-code flexibility built into their tools because they don't have time to constantly rely on developers. And companies of any background and of any size can obsess over their customers. And these companies can rebalance their businesses to adapt as new opportunities come into view, or to be resilient when things like COVID disrupt their customers' businesses. And when you do this, you're like a pioneer. And that's where being resourceful is more powerful than being full of resources. So let's go to the next. And being creative is exactly what you need right now. And that's because, well, any marketer is going to tell you that cookie apocalypse is worse than anyone could have predicted. And it impacts all facets of marketing and customer engagement. And so growth through new customer acquisition is getting harder. So loyalty strategies become more important. And first-party data is key to those strategies. Let's go to the next. Now, the next chapter of your customer engagement story must start with a cold observation. And that is, despite talking so much about storytelling, most brands' experiences are just funnels. They use the shopping flows that came with the platform. And the problem with funnel world is that, number one, it relies on third-party data, which is rapidly becoming constrained. Number two, it treats customer journeys as mechanical and largely fixed. And number three, it's not designed to foster long-term relationships. Funnel world looks like a catalog. And in funnel world, the purchase journey is search, list, detail, and then entice a click on the buy button. Let's go to the next. Now, what if your customer engagement strategy felt more like a story? You become emotionally invested with a brand. Consumer audiences have to feel that the story unfolds with them. Now, this is a visceral response, and it's constantly changing, adapting, and iterating. And when you tell stories with digital tech, you get closer to your audience and you get to know them firsthand. And you do this by crafting immersive experiences with creative content that you fine-tune, and you fine-tune that based on how your audience responds. Let's go to the next. But native mobile isn't the place for that because your audience doesn't want more apps. And even if they did, they need to buy new phones. Native mobile apps are built with a minimum OS version in mind, and updates to Android in particular cause mobile app developers a heck of a lot of heartburn. And the OS updates are ultimately the responsibility of the mobile carrier, not just the device manufacturer. So let's go to the next. So you need to think very carefully about your technology strategy for building web apps that don't introduce friction to your customers. Let's go to the next. Building traditional server-side rendered HTML is expensive. I'm talking about latency expensive. Getting the database, the application servers, the web servers to act in concert to construct HTML pages takes time and it takes effort. And often that effort is discarded immediately after the page has been served. So the time to construct has a measurable dollar cost. In fact, one fashion retailer told Forrester that an additional half second of latency resulted in an 11% drop in revenue. Let's go to the next. So speed matters. Speed matters, but last generation web architectures are suboptimal for the design. Let's go to the next. Now, tightly coupling components is how last generation tech attempted to solve this speed problem. And they provided a tightly integrated set of capabilities. And well, by metaphor, this product shown here is integrated experience. It's tightly integrated. And in certain circumstances, it works great, like when you're in your garage working on your bike, or maybe you're in a waiting room in an oil change shop. But you're not going to invite your friends over to watch The Mandalorian or the Super Bowl on it. And that's because as your audience gets larger, that screen isn't adequate. But there's no way to add a larger screen to this DVD player. Oh, that's right. The Mandalorian isn't distributed on DVD. So this is tightly integrated, but it hasn't kept up with the times. And it's not upgradable unless you rip and replace the entire thing. Now, this is how digital experience platforms used to be developed by vendors. Let's go to the next. And what you're looking at here is how those digital experience platforms used to be architected by vendors. And this is how something tightly integrated can have so much latency. When you use a traditional web architecture, there's lots of servers between the customer and your database. So typically there's a proxy server for load balancing, there's a group of web servers, there's a group of app servers, and a group of database servers. And communication among all these servers takes time, and it adds latency. And often you could have cache servers introduced to reduce that latency, but the trade-off for that is added complexity. Let's go to the next slide. So you need to know about a better way. You need to know about a next generation technology strategy. Let's go to the next. But why even make an investment like this? Well, customer-obsessed companies grow faster, on average twice as fast as their competitors that are less customer-oriented, even in a recession. Now, the customer-obsessed operating model is how you orient your business around your customer, and it contains clear explanations of what good looks like inside the best companies in the world. And this is the result of years of research by Forrester, and it explains what great culture looks like, what great structure looks like, the characteristics of people, processes, technology, and the way you should think about metrics. And those 6 levers give rise to your ability to support 4 operating principles: to be customer-led, to be insights-driven, to be fast, and to be connected. And when you combine that with the right technology strategy, what Forrester calls a future fit technology strategy, what results is you having new ways of working and new ways that customers can engage with you. And when a future fit technology strategy, 3 core drivers, platforms, practices, and partners, give rise to 3 crucial capabilities. It's a capability to be adaptive. That's changing when you spot an opportunity. It's a capability to be resilient, or to have resilience. That's changing when something exogenous like a pandemic or a geopolitical event happens. And then the capability to be creative, which you can think about as being resourceful even without being full of resources. And again, this comes to life in your business as new ways of working and new ways that customers can engage with you. But you have to do them both, because the technology is in service to your customer-obsessed enterprise. An obsessive focus on customers paired with a future fit technology strategy results in new ways of working and new ways that customers can engage with your business. Let's go to the next. Now, great customer experiences deliver on your customer obsession goals. And here's how modern web architecture delivers those experiences fast. So Jamstack is a relatively new concept based on an old one. Jamstack web applications are built using static site generation. However, that doesn't mean that these sites are static. Jamstack sites may use JavaScript, APIs, and markup, that's the jam, to provide dynamic content. And the difference is that what gets served by the web server doesn't change from user to user or from visit to visit. Instead, it's generated ahead of time with a specific tool chain. Now, the pages then deploy atomically to cloud storage or CDN, usually as part of a Git pipeline. Let's go to the next. Today, leading enterprises don't buy all this stuff from one monolithic digital experience platform. The technology stack you assemble to deliver your digital experiences is your digital experience platform. And you're going to compose your own DXP using parts from multiple vendors selected to deliver your distinct digital strategy. And the platform for you doesn't come pre-assembled out of the box. And even if it did, the risk of implementing it all at once is just too great for your enterprise. Now, you're going to need ordinary components of a DXP, such as content, customer data, and experience front end. But you'll likely also need extraordinary components specific to your industry, like a travel booking engine instead of a retail card, an electronic medical record system instead of an order history, and virtual interactive conference streams instead of static videos. Let's go to the next. Now, customer-obsessed brands with a future fit technology strategy compose their own DXP using parts from multiple vendors selected to deliver their distinct digital strategy. And your differentiated digital strategy provides the impetus and the justification to modernize your technology organization. Let's go to the next. And it doesn't have to be a big bang. Companies are gradually modernizing in a way that minimizes risks. So many are able to migrate page by page. And this tactic is only feasible if you're already decoupled for your experience layer from your back end. Now, this approach is akin to doing full page A/B testing. Let's go to the next. Okay, so now we're going to zoom back a little bit. How do you even get started with this approach of architecting your DXP? Well, here are 3 starting points for 3 different stages that you might be in. So number 1, if you're starting from scratch, you need to rethink your DX as a set of competencies and capabilities. And experience design is one of those capabilities. So engage your customer experience colleagues and grasp their CX vision of what your experiences of your platform needs to deliver for the business. Number 2, if you're rationalizing the chaos, then employ a product mindset. Deliver your platform like it's the product that your business uses to deliver all of its digital experiences, because it is. And as your platform's usage patterns change, focus your center of excellence on capabilities that get used, reused, and shared across all experiences your platform delivers. And if you're scaling your enterprise platforms, compete on merit, not muscle. That's because scaling to you means change to others. So focus on how your platform empowers your colleagues not just on standardization for its own sake, and use a strategist to work with your partners in the business units to help them build their priorities, strategies, and roadmap. And this requires diplomacy on your part. So let's go to the next. So what do great companies do with their digital experience platform? Well, customer-obsessed businesses discover what their customers consider to be their most valuable proposition. By observing them, by talking to them, and by experimenting with the experiences until they see uptake and subsequent improvement in their customers' business. Now, I published a case study about a year ago with some of these companies. And in each of the cases, they had no idea what they were going to build. They started by listening to their customers, they prototyped, and they worked until their customers' problem was solved. Then they scaled. Then they got the loyalty that drove sales volumes. And this is the exact opposite of how many companies think about e-commerce, which is what ads and promos do I need to run to get conversions? These three innovators that I interviewed for that research asked, what are my customers' biggest pains? Can I solve those pains with digital tools? And then the sales volumes just happened. Let's go to the next. And this is what we mean when we say that customer-obsessed businesses with a future-fit technology strategy build platforms to deliver their business's distinct value proposition. You just can't buy that off the shelf from one vendor. You have to buy components and assemble them. You have to compose them. And some of them you have to modify to fit your style. And you have to make some of those components yourself. That's why I told you that I build my own bikes. My bike is my platform, and you're going to build your platform that expresses your unique greatness as a business. Let's go to the next. So compose your own digital platform from parts you source from vendors, plus some of your own parts. Then use that to digitalize your business's distinct value proposition. Leverage partners along the way and grow by being customer obsessed. Let's go to the next. Now, your parents were not the digital generation. You are facing generational challenges. And being digital is a generational coming of age challenge. And I encourage you to take this step like it's your rite of passage, because it's just like riding a bike. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. And now we're going to move on to our panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Joe. That's awesome. Great presentation, and it resonates, of course, a lot with what we're seeing from Netlify when we listen to customers and build for them. When we talk about composable architectures, how would you say that enterprises should think about actually migrating from where they are at to composable architectures? I'm sure it's all about, like, you just one day hit a button and turn off the monolith, and then the other day you turn on your new composable architecture and all is well, right?
Yeah, just like that. No, not just like that. One of the cool things about composable architectures is that you can gradually roll them out. And so that little diagram that I shared talked about how you can take a monolithic application that you have, let's say, built a spa in front of, or maybe even you built it on like a traditional CMS, and page by page you can do A/B testing, and you can have your new page as a composed page. That composed page can use a composed architecture on your back end, and you just go individual page by page. You work out the kinks until your conversion rates are like they were beforehand, where your error rates are like they were beforehand, or ideally lower. And that actually sets up that actually sets you up for how you're going to be doing A/B testing and incremental rollouts in perpetuity. You know, taking this page level A/B test to get off of your monolith and then onto your fully composed architecture. You're going to be doing that A/B testing maybe at the component level from here on out. So there's no more big bang. You're going to be doing incremental migrations, and you're just going to evolve, kind of like how a body swaps out its cell count over time.
Yeah, we've seen since the early day a lot of the customers we've helped adopt composable architectures takes exactly that approach. I think at the last Jamstack conference, we had a team from Navan talking through how they adopted a composable approach from their core marketing side in exactly this manner, right? Like starting with like putting in this case Netlify in front of the existing marketing side just as a pass-through CDN, basically setting up that whole release management process that would allow them to start iterating really, really fast. And then starting with a couple of core pages and just starting pushing those out to Netlify, starting serving those straight out of our system. And then gradually, as they saw conversions, performance, and so on improve, rolling that out to more and more pages. And we've seen that a lot. But Chris, what are you hearing when you're talking to the whole sort of ecosystem around the Mac Alliance, around these kind of challenges around going from where you are and to where you want to be?
Yeah, I think like it definitely comes back to this idea that you can, and I think it's the most beautiful promise of headless and composable architecture in the Jamstack, is that you can gradually migrate, right? We come from this world where we all had monoliths, right? And we invested so much that it had long life cycles of 7 to 10 years. And then we build out a new monolith, we port all the content, we feature lock, and 18 months later, we are live on dated software, right? Like that's how it was. And in a composable way, you're saying, well, what I need to do maybe more, like my burning platform right now is my analytics or my payment, options or whatever it might be, right? Your commerce solutions, your content management system, and you can just change that part. And that's the beautiful part, right? And you can get success with it. It's also much easier to get stakeholders buy-in if you can say, hey, I went over here, I isolated my checkout experience. We have 7% higher conversion. That might be the difference between being in the black and not, right? Shouldn't we extend this to the rest of our digital experiences and properties, right? And I really think that that's, no matter if you're dealing with smaller SMBs, for example, or startups, or very large SIs, or very, very large enterprises as well, that is an advantage that plays out across the field. And it doesn't really matter if you're trying to build out a new DXP, like that's saying like a huge new marketing platform that has all the ins and outs and bells and whistles, or it's smaller properties, right? So that's something that we hear again and again. You can gradually migrate, right? And I think the other thing we hear is this idea that there's a lot of attention now in enterprises around headless and around composable architecture. And Joe, you of course, being from where you are, know all the numbers in this, right? But the attention around this is growing tremendously fast, right? This is probably the biggest shift we've seen since the move from on-prem to cloud, and in that you also have a ton of people that are very new to this. And sometimes we see someone adapting, saying, oh, my commerce solution or my CMS is headless. I'm good now, right? That's composable. We won. Exactly. And, the reality is you need some digital maturity here, right? In order to fully reap the benefits of this, it's not just choosing the right components. It's also very much, how do you orchestrate things, right? How do you work with them? How do those components interplay? Are you doing operations as usual with an army of system administrators and DevOps and so on? Or are you also working in abstract in that way? What I love about these headless offerings and composable architecture is what it offers, right? As in, yes, you have an API that's much easier to work with and it's modern, but it opens the door for so many other things. And that's in turn what gives you those fantastically fast sites that also are scalable and much more secure by default.
And speaking just to sort of the opposite side of all these migrations, the companies that stick around with this integrated TV, DVD, video player, what's the cost of that, right? Like what are some of the limitations that enterprises typically encounter with their current architectures? What are they missing out on by staying put?
Yeah. So when I talk to the way I frame this up to my clients is to say, look, if you're running a digital strategy that's pervasive, in other words, everybody's doing it and your customers love it, and you have old tech that doesn't have to change, you're one of the lucky ones. But if you're one of the normal, more common ones, you're dealing with customers whose preferences are changing, and you're dealing with competitors trying to disrupt your business, or you've got some growth targets that you can't hit with your current market. And so you've got to go figure out what new markets to go after. In other words, you need a differentiated digital strategy. And when you have a differentiated digital strategy, that means it's not pervasive. And if it's not pervasive, it can't support a software company. So you don't have anyone to build it out of the box for you. So what are you going to do? Well, what you used to do, and what you might have done at one point, is you cracked apart that DVD player thing, and you made some modifications, you duct taped it back together, and it probably hurt along the way. That's what this composable tech is supposed to solve for you, is it allows you to build differentiated digital strategies in a way that you can continuously recombine. Because the other thing I tell my clients is, be prepared. Your wonderful differentiated digital strategy that you just came up with is probably not going to end up being the thing that gets you to product market fit, but it gets you close enough. And you're going to have to iterate your way to product market fit with that strategy. And that involves lots of feedback and lots of tweaks, more than you're probably comfortable with. And there's one technology that is purpose-built to let you iterate like that. And that's the composable stuff. And that's the value of it. The technology, like the business value of the technology, isn't the same for every business. That technology allows you to iterate faster, to get to product market fit faster. And the business value for you is that awesome strategy that you worked on, and the results that come from that awesome strategy. The tech gets you there faster.
Yeah, that really resonates, and also with what you said around listening and adapting to customers, right? Like the slower your cycle of adapting, the slower that pace of iteration, the slower you're going to move towards where your customers really need you to be, right? Like, and that's one of the things I keep seeing with the companies that are sort of still stuck in larger legacy systems and monoliths and so on. When I typically poke at and ask them, like, how frequently can you release changes to production? I don't know what's your experience, but my experience is that the typical answer in larger companies is something like, hey, we have like a cadence of a release window every 2 weeks, and we push out then and so on, right? Like, and I think a lot of that comes from being tied to the slowest component in your whole system, and to the security and oversight and QA requirements of that component, and being forced to constrain everything to the fastest speed you could possibly ship that component at, right? Like, and once you start seeing like the ability to, especially the ability to decouple the whole experience layer from that underlying layer, we've just like provenly seen a completely different pace of iteration. So we ran some numbers internally just across our segment of enterprise customers, and saw that on average they ship changes to production about 140 times a week, right? Like, and that's where you get that kind of like pace of iteration that allows you to really reach your business goals for your digital experience.
That goes back to Matt, what you were just saying, right? Or what we were talking about before, right? This like notion that it is a little holistic, right? You need to choose the right components, but you also need to set yourself up for success and not just depend on the old way to operate, the old components. You need to sort of modernize across the stack. But if you do that, then as you say, there's a lot lot of benefits you can really reap, right? I mean, going from an average of once per week to 145 times per week is pretty substantial, right? But you see similar improvements in time to first byte, for example, which really does wonderful for conversion rates, right? So there's a lot to be said for thinking holistically.
And it's interesting to see for me sometimes when you tell this like to some of the companies that I in a like once a week or once every 2 week ship cycle, right? Like they almost won't believe that it's something they could come to, right? Like I was one of the customers we onboarded, I remember I was on a customer lunch with them, and at lunch I just checked our own UI for our own app and I said, oh, so today my team shipped to production 17 times so far. This is at lunch just for app.netlify.com. How would that compare, right? Like and there's this disbelief of like, well, we could never get to that piece. But they actually can, right? Like once you start adopting this, once you start to get this frictionless rollout where you know that anytime you ship something that's not working, you can roll it back. Your team will start responding and they will start publishing it at that level. We just see that repeatedly. But that also leads me to how do you see enterprises prioritizing the need to modernize? To modernize their current architectures, given all the other projects and priorities? Why should they prioritize web modernization projects now?
Yeah, I'll break it down. They should prioritize it because loyalty is so crucial in 2023. So I talked a little bit about cookie apocalypse, but cookie apocalypse means gone are the days of cheap acquisition from social. So how are you going to get to know your customers? With first-party data. How are you going to get first-party data? With great experiences. How are you going to achieve product market fit with experiences? You're going to iterate and experiment. And how do you iterate faster? You iterate faster with modern composable architectures.
What do you think, Joe, on the, like sometimes in these days, there can be some fear of replatforming, right? Just because, whoa, I'm not going to do something that's too expensive. There's a lot of stakeholders here and so on. But we often, in our end, and I see it in markets as well, right? Across the ecosystem, we talk a lot about the cost of doing nothing, right? There's this fallacy that you think, well, we already paid for it, right? So let's wait to invest in something new. But it's not just missed opportunity. Could you perhaps put some word on it from your perspective on what is the cost of doing nothing and staying put?
Yeah, so I take clients through, we have sort of a 3-step methodology where you start with strategy, you do your journey mapping, and then in the middle, you have your business impact. So you take every one of those digital interactions and you evaluate it. And then that kind of helps bubble up with stack ranking. And then you build your roadmap for that. And so the cost of doing nothing, here's the cost of doing nothing. Just let that backlog never get depleted. There you go. That's your opportunity cost. And if you're doing the strategy work, you know exactly what your strategy, how your strategy would pay off. So the cost of doing nothing is you're not getting to that. You're not getting that strategy, or you're getting to it at the same frustratingly slow pace that you always have. And you're making those trade-offs where, what am I going to release? I'm going to release the thing that I can release. Now that's really inside out thinking. That's not outside in thinking. If you were outside in thinking, you would ask yourself, what do I need to do to get to the endpoint that the customer needs me to get to first? And when I'm working with a Forrester client and I hear indications that they're like, I can stay put. What's so bad about staying put? Or they'll make it kind of like a redundant or like a rhetorical question. Well, what's the cost of staying put? And I talk them through that methodology and say, look, you can calculate the cost of staying put right now. And that will also tell me if they have done the rest of the work, like if they actually have a strategy, if they actually know what digital interactions have benefit to their customers and value to the firm. And if they don't know that, then it's very easy to blow off the question and say, oh, what's the cost of doing nothing? So yeah, it's sort of a multi-layer. Like on one hand, it's just the cost of doing nothing is you're going to continue to go at the same pace that you are. And there is someone out there with generative AI looking to disrupt your business. Walk as fast as you like. But remember, you're being chased by a shark, a very, very smart shark.
It's one of the things that I've been talking about with various customers and people in the industry, just that as generative, one of the effects I expect, and that I think is pretty obvious to expect from generative AI, is just like the acceleration of content production and the acceleration of code changes, right? Like I think there could be a lot of speculation of all the other layers and what it'll lead to, but I think those two things are sort of very straightforward to predict, right? Like we'll see acceleration in content changes and acceleration in code development. And then it's also like really obvious that if you have that like ship once a week or once every 2 weeks gate in your system, and the amount of content changes start drastically accelerating, and the amount of code changes starts drastically accelerating, then that becomes just more and more of an unsurmountable bottleneck that's going to really keep you uncompetitive.
And I also think a last part of this that I see a lot is this notion that in a headless world, when you do things right, it's about developing things, getting to production, right? But in traditional world, and I saw this 15 years in agency, like there's a huge overhead for just keeping the lights on, you know, and the traditional way of setting caching headers and optimizing your infrastructure is not okay, we're done. We'll just leave it alone for the next year. It's a continuous effort, right? And a lot of those forces are locked up and resources are locked up in just keeping lights on. And you don't really get anything out of it because they're not busy doing new work that will move the needle. So I think properly done composable architecture really also helps you with making sure that the efforts you spend are spent on developing things that will change outcomes for your business, rather than just keeping lights on in operations, right? Obviously, there's a huge focus of Netlify. That's exactly what we do, right? But so it is something that we're super aware of. But I also think that it is an important part of the puzzle, right? Because it's one of those things that you don't think of because, well, that's just the way it is. It's the price of doing business. It's almost like a hidden cost. The reality is, with modern architecture, you don't need to do that.
Let's talk a little about the actual act of composing stuff together and connecting them, right? Like, because one of the pieces that's true is that there's this difference between like a very simple monolithic headless architecture where you might have an experience layer and one headless backend, and that's it. And to be fair, we see a lot of those in like campaign sites and smaller projects, greenfield projects, right? Like, but as soon as we're starting to talk larger projects within larger companies, then we tend to really see a real composable system where you have different data sources, different commerce sources, and where you inherently start also typically having a mixture of modern systems that are built to be part of this composable world and older systems that were not built with this in mind. So obviously, like we recently launched Netlify Connect really as the orchestration layer that can give enterprises a way to source all that different content and commerce data and so on, and then build on top of it. But what would you see that this kind of unified data at the edge through a single API can unlock for enterprises and web teams?
Oh, geez, yeah. I would say, you know, I look at composable sort of through two layers. In other words, there's two layers that you end up composing. So the stuff in the back end. So you got a cart, you got some content. You got a search engine, something like that. And let's just suppose that there's some orchestration you have to do between those systems to compose them together. You make a modification to some piece of content that triggers a reindex of the search. And there's all sorts of that type of stuff flying around in the back end. And then on the front end, you'll have, let's say, widgets. So you'll work in Figma, you'll build a wireframe, you'll export based on a design system, you'll turn them into, let's say, React components. You have a dev plumbing them into the back end, and then you can use some sort of experience designer for your marketers, and that'll give you your spa or whatnot. But the question becomes, what is the point of aggregation for all of those components on the front end? Are you going to have all of those components talking to each discrete individual system on the back end, or are you going to have them going through a single like graph endpoint? And there's pros and cons to each, or there's trade-offs to each, depending upon the size or complexity. But that point, sometimes I describe it as, where is the point of aggregation? Is the point of aggregation on the page itself, or is the point of aggregation at some type of a gateway or other layer? But having that all in one endpoint, well, your devs hit one endpoint, you got security in one endpoint. You can control what your devs can query against instead of the entire enterprise. So there's lots of those sorts of trade-offs. That seemed like a really architectural answer because it had depends in there quite a bit. But yeah, if you have one endpoint, everything coming in and out is made consistent, and you have one point. You could even consider that to be a thinner attack surface as well.
Yeah, part of what we've seen is also just like there's on the one hand this need for unification, where you see like the first four content sources we announced for Netlify Connect was Contentful, Shopify, WordPress, and Drupal. And there's on the one hand this need for unification, where typical e-commerce, you have a headless CMS and you have some commerce platform. And you always need to like query both to present one page, because you have like there's almost no cases where you have strictly information for one of them, right? Like, and giving your team sort of a unified way to get that content in and to not deal with two different API systems and know the performance characteristics and rate limits and so on becomes really important. But then there's the other part of these integrations, which is sort of like the WordPress and Drupal world, right? Like, where we also just see one of the large customers, like they were rebuilding a new site, a new part of their site with Contentful and a modern front-end framework, right? Like, and then we've talked a bit more to them. They had 2,000 Drupal installs sitting around across other projects, right? Like, and it's like there's no way they're going to be able to do a full-on content migration for all of those Drupal installs to something else, but they still want to start adopting the modern front-end way of the modern front-end layer for any of the digital experiences, right? Like, so being able to just put one uniform query layer in between and sort of bridge the gap between your modern headless content infrastructure and your sort of traditional legacy infrastructure, that's been one of the pieces that we've seen the first pilot customers of Netlify Connect being really excited about and get a lot of value out. And then today I'm pretty excited to just announce like two new connectors in the modern world, support for both Sanity and content stack, as well as we sort of keep increasing the number of available source plugins for Netlify Connect. So let's see if we can have a little time for questions from the audience. There's one question in the Slack around how do we use Expo to its full advantages? How does that fit into modern stacks for end-to-end enterprise applications? And I'm no Expo expert since that sits a little bit more in that traditional native world, but I think it's part of what's absolutely triggered also this journey towards composable, that today you also don't have one monolithic digital experience, right? Like, as time go by, you might want to publish some of those mobile applications for different purposes. There might be areas where that makes sense, and other areas where your web application is the core driver, and there might be areas where you'll start running the software on a kiosk style thing, and you need to get access from the same content, the same data there, right? Like, so I think that's also been a big driver for this API-fication of all your content and commerce infrastructure. And then we've seen in the web space, obviously, we've really been pioneers in building that release management system that allows you to constantly push changes. And Expo has done great work in the mobile application space to build release management systems to get pace there also, even if just like the inherent restrictions of app stores and so on makes it a lot harder to get to 140 releases a week. But these kind of systems become really important at every tier of your different digital experiences, in my opinion. Do you feel that Markdown is the most universal content management system, sort of like a compilation target, similar to how Notion, Obsidian, and the like export to Markdown and can upload it? So Joe, would you say when you talk to enterprise customers that they have all their content sitting around in neatly formatted Markdown?
I would say they don't.
They probably wish, but also Markdown has its own set of restrictions, right? Like, and I don't think we'll ever get down to one singular format for all your different content. I think we'll keep seeing different vendor even tweak their specific formats. We'll see Markdown with MDX in it. We'll see custom structured content formats like sanity structure and so on, right? Like, and I think the world of content in reality is too complex to be codified in one uniform format that works for all cases. That's yet another reason for composable systems, that the system that might be great for power your interactive publication might not be the same system you want for your blog.
Matt, I hope your cough felt better soon.
Yeah, all good. Just too much talking, I think.
All right, we have a few more Q&As.
Yeah. How do you compare Netlify Connect to products like TakeShape, Concha, Apollo, and Hasura? Chris, do you want to take another initial stab or want me to dig in?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think what Netlify Connect is it differs in a few different ways, right? But I also think it differs because it's part of Netlify. So essentially, when we started out building a Netlify, we have, if you look at the layers there, there's really operational orchestration. And that's about abstracting away the traditional way of saying, well, I'm on cloud, but it's business as usual. And I'm still building all these systems out, and I still have to set my caching headers and guard against SQL injections and all the different things. And I have my infrastructure engineers and my system admins and so on, right? And I think part of what we're seeing now is that's no longer tenable. There's too many services to wrap around. And we were speaking of generative AI and so on, right? AI's finest mission is really abstracting away things that used to be manual and can now be automated. And that's what we're talking about in this layer as well. It's not about being better at sending varnish caching. It's about not having to do so again, right? And the same goes for a bunch of things in that layer. And that operational orchestration, if you will, is a foundation of Netlify. And then on top of it, I think if we learned anything in the last 10 years, is that when you deal with headless and composable architecture, you need unified release management. Like, you need a singular workflow. It needs to play into how you work with Git. You need a very solid way of tying together all these different components. And that's, of course, why we built Netlify in the first place, right? But I think that gives us some unique advantages of building a Netlify Connect on top of it, which in turn means that you can set this both in front of I would not say legacy, but at least incumbent applications, right? And you can work with those and still keep not just for migration purposes, but keep that in your stack. And it opens up to having that common workflow throughout your stack towards the new composable components as well as you plug them in. And so I think, and Matt, you can dive into more details on how the Netlify Connect layer differs. But just by in itself, by being part of the Netlify story, that makes it actually quite a different beast altogether.
And it's a big, complex problem space where obviously over time we'll see a lot of different solutions and sometimes some layering of them.
Oh yeah.
In terms of the list there, I would say there's a difference between like the real-time systems like Apollo and Hasura. That's really based on putting a query engine in front of your existing system, right? Like, but every request you have still flows through that and touches your database or your API as you work with it. And then a system of Connect that's not real time, but more of a kind of a content lake, you could call it, right? Like where you define the source connectors and the events that will update them. And then Connect keeps its own cache of all that content available behind a GraphQL API. But when you actually like render a page or render a component, you're not touching your API or your data source. And there are different use cases where you want this real-time system. And then there's a lot of these use cases where you want this kind of data lake system where you kind of get the guarantee that the front-end team can work and build, but they can never overwhelm your API. They can never sort of suddenly trigger rate limits. And especially if you have a mixture of modern systems and legacy systems, you know that those legacy systems might not be built for real-time traffic in the way you want to query them through an API. So you want them sort of gated behind this middleware layer. That then also gives us a lot of interesting opportunities into tying that into our general release management process, where we can potentially do more versioning, branching, authentication layers there, and so on. That becomes really powerful, right? Like, so if it's distinguished between these kind of like the need for a real-time system where you actually just in some way putting a different query engine on top of a set of different backend systems, and then the kind of like intermediary layer where you actually slurp in the content and now you can use the content from many different sources together, but without actually depending on those sources. Those are sort of two of the big differences between categories.
All right. I'm going to read out the next one. Matt, what is the state of GDPR compliance on Netlify Connect?
And so GDPR is not a simple checkbox element, but a complex set of rules and laws, right? Like, so obviously with any kind of data layer, there'll always be a part where we can make sure that we treat our customers' data, which would be the companies we work with full privacy and with full options for deleting it if they want and so on, right? Like, but then there's an extra level where our customers that build systems with their data have to have their own data privacy policies in place and have to do their own homework right? Like, so there'll always be these two layers of it, where from our end, we've always put a lot of focus on privacy and security and built GDPR compliant systems. And then, of course, anyone that's building on top of our platform will also have to do their homework in terms of like, how are they making sure that both they are informing their users where their data goes and they give users the right level of control over their personal data.
All right. I think there's no more questions, but I have one for Joe. Joe, where can everyone watching go and see you live on BMX? I have to know. Asking for a friend.
Okay, asking for a friend. I do have a YouTube channel after my name, and I am working on a new project this year. I turned 50, and I'm telling the whole story of what it means to me, and I'm working on dialing the hardest trick ever done. So watch the adventure.
Wow, it's amazing. Very exciting.
And thank you for asking. It was very cool.
That's super cool, man. Love it.
Thank you so much, Better, for the kind note in the chat. And thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Joe, for being with us today. Thanks, Chris, for joining up. And thank you, everyone.
It's been
Thanks
great.
so much, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks, Joe.
See you guys.